Hello and welcome back to Books. Today I wanted to do a wrap-up of my nonfiction November. I don't think I always do a wrap-up. I haven't gone back and looked at my videos, but I think wrap-ups are kind of unusual on my channel a little bit. But I read 4 books this month for nonfiction November, which, as slow as I read, is pretty good for me. And I didn't get around to reviewing all 4, so I kind of want to do the wrap-up today to give you my impressions of the 4 books I read, 2 of which I did actually review. So the first book that I read for nonfiction November was The Viking Wars by Max Adams. There's a review of this book on my channel, and I liked the book. It was a dense read. It was not an easy read, but it was really good, and I really enjoyed what I learned. It was an intellectual challenge to keep up with everything. The writing style was, I think, a little bit quirky. And there were a blizzard of Old English names to get through in the book, but I really enjoyed the challenge of the book, and with the exception of a lack of maps or easy-to-use maps, I thought the book was very good, and I would certainly recommend The Viking Wars by Max Adams to anybody who's interested in that period of English history between, about 800 and about the year 1000. The second book I read for nonfiction November was Just Kids by Patti Smith. This is a memoir of Patti Smith's relationship and her life with the artist Robert Mapplethorpe. And their, I think, fairly unusual relationship for the time period of the 1970s. Both of their careers as artists and performers, Patti Smith's career as a poet and musician, and Mapplethorpe's career as an artist, their lives together, the difficulties they had, the success they eventually had, and then her reaction to Mapplethorpe's death as a result of complications from AIDS. I liked Just Kids. I think I liked it a little bit more right when I finished reading it. I think it's a good memoir. I do think, as I think I said when I did the review of Just Kids, my problem with memoir in general is how much do I trust the author, how honest are they being. I do think Patti Smith was fairly honest, but I do think that there's a little bit more artiness in the way in which she portrays the events that took place that kind of lends almost a too idealized air to what was happening. But it doesn't blanch at covering some really difficult times in her life and her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe. And I think if you're interested in the New York City art and music scene of the late 1960s and 1970s, then I think it would be a really interesting memoir to read, and I'm glad that I read it. I did think it was good. The third book I read, and the first book from Nonfiction November that I didn't review, was this book called Through Two Doors at Once, The Elegant Experiment That Captures the Enigma of Our Quantum Reality by Anil Ananthaswamy. This is a book, the kind of book that I really sometimes enjoy reading when I'm reading nonfiction, and that is a book about science, a particular book about physics. I was a terrible science student and math student in high school and college. As a matter of fact, in college I avoided as much science and math as I possibly could. But as an adult, I've really gotten interested in physics and quantum physics, and I've tried to read books about the subject, at least once or twice a year. The title, Through Two Doors at Once, refers to the double slit experiment in physics, where you shine light through an aperture onto a barrier with 2 slits in it with a piece of photoreceptive material behind it. And what you get when you do that is not what you'd expect. They're not 2 bars of light that are represented, but rather an interference pattern indicating that light acts as a wave. How can light act as a wave when it's made up of individual photons? How can subatomic particles move across space faster than the speed of light and appear instantly in one place and then another? How can photons of light, how can a single photon of light seemingly pass through both slits at once? Why is it that Newton's laws apply in the visible world we can see, but when we get to the subatomic level, they don't? Why don't Einstein's theories work necessarily at the subatomic level? These are questions that scientists have been trying to solve. Through Two Doors at Once does a good job of laying those theories out and explaining, in particular, explaining the experiments that went into kind of developing all these theories. And to be honest with you, for the first 120, 150 pages of the book, I was right there with the author, and I was understanding everything, and I felt really good. Felt really confident. And then as you get near the end of the book, the theories about why light behaves the way it does and the arguments between different camps of physicists begin to pile up, and it became increasingly hard for me to keep track of what was known in opposition to what was being projected. So he covers a lot of different theories about light. And explains a lot of different theories that try to explain why there is this difference between the observable world and the rules the world at the subatomic level seems to follow. For me as a non-science person, it got a little bit more difficult the further into the book I got, and so my momentum slowed down. I blew through the first 100 pages or so. I was really excited about my reading, and then it got more and more difficult, and I slowed down. But I still really like the book, and I'm sure if you have a greater, grounding in science than I do, then it would probably be a really, really enjoyable read. And for me, it was an enjoyable read, which I liked. I thought it was a good book. The last book I read was a book I've had for a long time. It's called Brunelleschis Dome. This is ostensibly the story about how the Italian architect and Renaissance thinker and Renaissance man Filippo Brunelleschi created the dome in Florence, which is depicted in the picture here, and all the kinds of problems he had to overcome with that. And certainly the story of how the dome is built is really interesting. If you have an interest in the history of construction and engineering, there's a lot of information about exactly how Brunelleschi went about creating something that hadn't been created since Roman times, how he went about creating something in the 15th century that was larger than any dome created really for hundreds of years after that, and all the engineering that went into it. You can find all that out about the dome itself, but what you really find out about is how important Brunelleschi himself is, and how much he invented, and how ingenious he was. To build the dome, he had to invent machines and hoists and cranes that were really subtle and sophisticated pieces of machinery to be able to be capable of lifting the material up as high as it had to be to create the dome on the dome there in Florence. There's a good deal of discussion about Brunelleschi's rivalry with Lorenzo Ghiberti, and Ghiberti is the person who created and won the right to create the bronze friezes on the baptistry doors, which are right next to the cathedral in Florence. In lots of ways, I think the author Ross King has decided to part of what his goal in the book was to prove the importance of Brunelleschi in terms of Renaissance thinking. And he talks about Brunelleschi's impact on Michelangelo and on Leonardo da Vinci, and his work with Donatello, and all the different areas of life and engineering in which Brunelleschi had an expertise and a talent for. That Brunelleschi had studied the ancient Romans, that he was an innovator in the way he went about constructing things. It's possible, I think the author goes a little bit too far in trying to assert Brunelleschi's importance, but I really think the book was really good and really interesting, and had a lot of really detailed information about construction and politics and life in early Renaissance Florence. So those are the 4 books that I read for Nonfiction November. If you've read any of those books, or if you have any comments about or any thoughts about what I said today in my wrap-up video, I'd be happy to hear those, and please leave them in the comments below. Thank you for watching.